and welcome back to a new video. I'm Eva if you're new around here, and I thought that I will start with this illustration of the coast because I quite like the loose feeling of brushstrokes on this one, and some of you are asking about the brushes, so I will mention which brushes or brush packs I usually use in illustrations along the way. So for example, in this one I use a mixture of watercolor brushes for some of these loose strokes and then dry gouache brushes for some of these grass blades, and then I use some of the watercolor splatters for these details. And as you can see, I combine this sketchbook spread with the waterfall inspiration, and there is this coast kind of in the background, which is not super coastal illustration as from the title, but the coast is there. So anyway, so this is one of the first sketchbook spreads, and now let's move on to the next one. Alright, so here is another coastal inspired illustration, and this one was inspired by Scandinavia, and I found like different references for this type of coast. I think this one was Denmark, and then I looked at different references of some houses, and I combined I think maybe 3 or 4 references for this one. And in this illustration, I combined mostly pastel brushes, so you can see it in these textures and also on these like flowers and for these grass blades. And then this one is a little bit like older artwork, which I combined with these other 2 for this spread. And this one was actually done on a live stream, which I did with Becca Illustration, and she provided this cute reference of geese and like farmland. And then I looked at some other references for nature to make it a little bit more green, because it was like an overcast day in the reference, and I liked more vibrant colors for this one. And yeah, I like how all of these illustrations kind of work together. So yeah, coastal, one of my favorite topics. Anyway, okay, next one. So this one is a coast of Cornwall, if I'm not mistaken, and this was also inspired by the live stream which I did, which I just mentioned. And these both references were on the live stream, and then I looked at different seal photo references online, especially for these like diving seals, because I wanted to have kind of like a underwater scene as well in this collection, because we have like different perspectives for the view of the boat, then we have the side view of the seal, and then I wanted to include something which is like underwater. And I used mostly watercolor brushes for these leaves, and then I combined it with some of the gouache brushes as well, and then I quickly added some details like these with the leaf stamp brushes. And the line art is actually sketching brush, so I like to use this more rough brush for the edges of the artworks. And let's go to next one. So here are studies of landscapes inspired by a coast. Most of them are again Cornwall, because it's quite nice what you can see there on the references, like these big cliffs and different shapes for the beach from different perspectives and coves. And I made this one as a tutorial in my art club, so if you are interested in, you know, practicing perspective and compositions from references, especially with the coastal theme, then this is there, so you can watch it. And here is like a rough exploration which I did, where I wanted to kind of decide what type of landscape I will do for a main tutorial. So I roughly sketched some landscapes. As you can see, it's a very rough sketch. And here I just tested some colors which I wanted to use for the tutorial, so I can share also a color palette together with the tutorial in my art club. And this is how the illustration from the tutorial turned out. I quite like it because it's very bright and these flowers in the foreground create this beautiful meadow feeling on top of the cliff, and then you have this nice beach and the imposing cliffs. So yeah, this landscape was definitely interesting to make because you can combine different brush strokes and shapes for the cliffs together with the floral and meadow feel in the foreground on top of the cliff. So this tutorial was definitely interesting to make. And then to this sketchbook spread composition, I added some of these leaf brush stamps and the character that I made for one of the challenges, the Draw It in Your Style. And I think it actually quite fits with these illustrations, kind of in this world where you can imagine that it's like a little bit windy, also on the coast, and maybe she's walking on the cliff. I was thinking maybe I can actually move the character here on the cliff. That can be quite fun, and maybe I can flip it. I would need to remove some of the background, of course, but actually that can work quite well as well. So maybe quite well as well. Anyway, maybe I will illustrate some character or maybe dogs running on top of the cliffs. Or you can do that as well if you follow the tutorial, so you can add a character on top of the cliff, and I think that would fit there quite well. Alright, so I'll just put this back where it was for now, and let's move on to the next artwork. Alright, so this one was inspired by Scandinavia again, and I kind of combined different references for this one because some of the waterfalls are, I feel like, more iconic for like Iceland or some of the fjords in Norway, but then the houses and these little boats, I looked at the inspiration from some of the Swedish archipelago villages where you have these fishermen houses where they are colorful, and I read they were painted all different colors, so when the fishermen were coming back from the fishing trips, they can recognize the houses from the distance, like which house is theirs. And I read that also that was the case in some of the Italian villages like Cinque Terre, but yeah, please correct me if I'm wrong in the comments, but I found that that's an interesting fact. And then I looked at some of the references for the birds, for the puffins, because that was one of the challenges, and let me see if I have a time-lapse replay. So I sketched some of these compositions quickly, then I used watercolor brushes for the base shapes, and the prompt was clouds and birds and flowers, so that's how I combined everything. And then I added some characters, line art, so I kind of went back and forth with adding some shapes and colors for this one. And yeah, I think this one kind of turned out quite nicely as well, with combination of loose watercolor brush strokes where you can see them just very loose here in the background, and then I redefined some edges with just line art. And yeah, some of you pointed out that it would be nice to add maybe more people or more boats or something else happening here in the background. So I think maybe I will come back to some of these compositions and kind of define them more and take them to the kind of next level where you can add more details. Alright, this next one is kind of on the coast as well, because you see I have two characters building a sandcastle, but this is more on the beach, so you don't see the whole coast. But I included this one in the overview because it is kind of on the coast. For this one, I used the gouache brushes, and I made a class how to approach drawing kits and lots of tips about using simple shapes and looking at different references and how to draw kid characters for the book illustration. Alright, so here is the next one, and this one was also inspired by some of the prompts which were part of the prompt list. So there were different prompts like adventure, seaside, and summer, and this one was inspired by trips which we used to take as a family to Croatia, and there were like a lot of cute crabs running around the rocks, and they were quite shy, so every time when you walk closer to them they would hide between the rocks. And also here I wanted to explore some shapes when drawing rocks, especially because rocks can be quite complex in these coastal formations because there is like a lot of colors. So here I try to block it in two different areas, like area in sunshine and area in the shadow, and then I edit the characters like me with my sister and the parents. So yeah, so this one was definitely fun to make, but also quite challenging. And here is a new one which I made, focusing on simplified shapes and character flow and movement in the illustration, keeping the illustration quite simple, as you can see, not adding too many details to the character. And she is like walking on the coast, so I still need to edit these video lessons, but this will be a class soon as well with tips about movement and flow in the illustrations by using simple shapes and more simplified approach. Alright, so this one is a little bit older. I made this one a while ago where I was mostly using I was really enjoying using pastel colors, as you can see in this color palette. So it's much like softer and less contrasting artwork, so there is not so much contrast, but it was definitely interesting to make. And this was one of the first complex coastal artworks that I made, where I was focusing on using different flowers and different colors in this kind of like bushy, detailed meadow landscape. So yeah, that was definitely good study to do, and I made like different brushes which I can use for leaves and flowers, so I can kind of simplify my process. And this location was inspired by Spanish coast. I think I looked at some of the northern parts of Spanish coast, and then I also looked at some references for flowers in UK. So yeah, so these flowers were also inspired by some of the UK coastal seaside. And this one was inspired by Canary Islands. So again, I was trying to practice composition and different landscapes when it comes to, coastal landscapes. So you can see there are like different perspectives on each of these locations, where you're looking more from the top, more from the side, and you are more closer to the house. So here I also edit some small cats. I quite like this one, even though it's super tiny. So yeah, and then I edit some cacti and some surfers and people walking, on the beach and stuff. Here is another one which is coastal inspired landscape. This one was inspired by Canary Islands, and I actually sketched this one on location. So this was from real life. I was standing on a side, I'm not sure, maybe on a I think it was on a balcony, and then I was trying to capture the sunrise, and it was very difficult because of course it doesn't take that long, so it disappears. So this one was quite challenging, but I think it was definitely good practice. I don't think this is like my favorite landscape, but I think it's for sure good to practice observation from real life. Here, this one was inspired from some photos that I found on Pinterest, and here I wanted to practice combining meadows, seaside or coastal landscape with some big cumulus clouds. So I want to do more compositions with cumulus clouds in the future again, but this one was definitely interesting to do as well. Then this next sketchbook spread was inspired by Hawaii and the surfing culture there. I mean, you have a lot of different locations where people surf, of course, but here I looked at different like flowers and different shapes of foliage and trees, which should represent more Hawaii. And here I was exploring also different geometric shapes for the rocks and more simplified way how you can draw water and waves. Here is another coastal landscape which I was exploring, and this one was based on a photo, and it's inspired by Scotland and the colorful houses there, and it was also very beautiful autumn photo reference, and I wanted to again practice the coastal landscape and applying different color hues to the water just to bring this nice vibrance to the scene and combining it with different simplified shapes for the trees. Then this one is another older piece, and this one was also done on location, and maybe I have a time lapse, so let me see. So you can see the time lapse or how I was building the scene here, and maybe I can zoom in so you can see it better. So this one, as you can see, I didn't do sketches, and I was practicing painting directly in color, and you notice that the boat was very big from the start, so I had to scale it down, and then I tested different shapes for the clouds. And in these studies, which you can see also later, I didn't use that many texture brushes. I think it was just like maybe 1 or 2 brushes, and I was focusing mostly on shapes. But I think these compositions would be nicer if there is like a little bit more texture and you know, maybe some more like loose brush strokes. At least that's what I would like to implement now. So, and this was a dog park, and I was trying to capture a movement of different dogs. So that one was very difficult because you can just look once and that's it, because then the movement or the pose of the dog is gone. Alright, so here the next one. I looked at some poses of characters on Pinterest, and I wanted to draw some classic poses you can see on many reference photos, that you are chilling on the floaty in a pool. So yeah, and then maybe I can implement it in some of these coastal locations. But then on this one, I decided it's better to implement maybe just like small figures of surfers walking around, because of course you can't just float on the inflatable in these big waves. But yeah, I would like to explore more of these character poses for the coastal landscapes. Here is the landscape that I just had in the previous sketchbook spread. So focusing really on simplified shapes like horizon, the waves, and the sand dunes. And then here I included the surfer, just to feel the composition and work with the flow and visual lines in the composition. And this one I wanted to include more top view on the beach and kind of create this scale of this like long beach and these like floral meadows. So as you can see, this is very similar landscape to the one I showed you at the beginning. And now we are moving to different locations. So these were inspired by Bali. And as you can see, I used different colors. So here I used more like vibrant colors for these rice fields and the water, and more vibrant colors as well for the flowers. So these were also kind of like a older sketches of mine, and I was really focused on using simplified shapes and not using much of texture and shadows, just to really focus on simplification of shapes, which I think it's great for practice when you are working with landscapes, because landscapes are quite complex. Here I was also doing a study how you can look at the sketches, then how it would look in color, and then how the values would work. Because when you study values, that definitely helps you to notice the contrast, and if you want to keep the same value hues, because as you can see here they are quite close together. So if you want to have more contrast, you would need to adjust the values and so on. So I think these studies are also very useful when you want to improve your art skills. All right, and then this one was inspired by photos that I found on Pinterest of Amalfi Coast, because I can imagine that's a very nice area to walk around on the coast and just seeing these beautiful old houses. And lemons are actually popular to grow there, but here, as you can see, I included oranges or clementines because I just wanted to include more orange color rather than yellow. And yeah, so this one is also one of my favorite studies, which I did in the past, because again, like I can totally imagine just sitting in this backyard of the house, maybe with a cat or a dog, and just draw there. So I included the iPad there, as you can see. But anyways, I will finish this sketchbook tour with this artwork so the video doesn't become too long. And if you want to check out some of my classes and brushes, I will link everything in the description. So thank you so much for watching and see you next time. Bye!